It is working. Hooray! All right, so tonight we are going to talk about kashrut, keeping kosher. This is the topic where I find a lot of people begin to get uncomfortable. Because yes, coming to services, people can understand that. That makes sense. Giving tzedakah, controlling what you say, your relationships with other people, all of these things, for many people, they make sense. They're familiar to other forms of moral behavior. The rituals are not so unusual. But when it comes to changing how we eat, well, that changes everything, right? The way that you take care of your kitchen, the way that you put food into your body, this is something that happens at least 3 times a day. And this can be very difficult to absorb. So I want to say from the very beginning here, as we go through Kashrut, and it's going to be a 2-part class, I'll put a break in the middle, but we're going to do 2 parts. You don't do everything at once. And if you're learning about Judaism, you don't say, all right, the rabbi said A, B, C, D, E, so now tomorrow we are doing A, B, C, D, E. No, tomorrow you do A. A month, 2 months from now, you do B. Right? You have questions, you come, you talk to me, we discuss it, then we talk about how to make C happen. It has to be a growing process. I speak from experience. I was raised in a Reform congregation. My family was Reform. I did not grow up keeping kosher. And when I was a late teen, around 18 or so, was when I began to start keeping kosher. And it was a long process. It took me a few years before I had made the full shift. And I don't expect anyone else to make a jump faster than I did. So it is something that will take time. It is a long-term commitment, and it is also a long-term investment, because once you have done this for long enough, you will begin to really understand the benefits and the rewards. But let's talk about those details. With enough of the commercial at the start. We good? Good. So why are we keeping kosher? Well, the first thing we can say is because the book of Leviticus tells us to. I am the Lord your God. Sanctify yourself and be holy, for I am holy. For I am the Lord that brought you up out of the land of Egypt to be your God. You shall therefore be holy, for I am holy. This is one of the preambles to many of the to one of the sections among the many that talk about keeping kosher. So apparently, keeping kosher is part of our response to our relationship, our interaction with God, which is meant to be holy. Just as God is holy, we will be holy. Now, the term holy, kadosh, in Hebrew is often misunderstood because holy usually just means, in English, like special, right? Like godly special. That's an okay definition. But really what holy means is that it is something that is set apart, that has been designated as not of regular use. And you can see how when it comes to choosing our food, choosing how we eat, and changing our lifestyle around us, that we are not just doing a little thing, we are setting apart our lives in a very special way. We are creating a holy atmosphere for ourselves. But what does that mean? And why should we still be doing it? Well, Rambam, our favorite guy, Maimonides, tells us one reason. Why? Because they're commandments. And for every commandment, he points out, it is correct for a person to investigate the laws of the Holy Torah and to know their purpose to the best of his abilities. If he does not find a reason or purpose with something, it should not be light in his eyes. That means if you're studying and you're coming across the commandment, don't steal. And you say, well, yes, of course, stealing would be bad, it would hurt other people, it would hurt society, that makes sense. And then you come across another commandment which says, don't eat the sciatic nerve tissue, the area of the thigh. We'll talk about this another time. Why not? What's the social benefit? What's the personal benefit? And you sit and you study and you think and you try to figure this out, but you can't come up with an explanation of why. That doesn't mean you should treat it as not being important. Just because you can't figure out why doesn't mean that you ignore it. He should not reject the commandments because he does not know the reasons. And he should not attribute false ideas to God or think about them as of profane matters. Meaning, just because you can't figure it out doesn't mean you start making stuff up, and it doesn't mean that you treat it as though it's unimportant. that you still have to do it. This is a very important concept in Jewish law called na'aseh v'nishma, is the usual shorthand we do in Hebrew, which is usually translated to mean we will do and we will understand. Meaning that sometimes you have to do before you understand. The same way that we will teach children basic skills like brushing your teeth before they understand why brushing teeth is really important. We teach how to observe the commandments before sometimes we always understand why to follow the commandments. And that means that we have to sometimes put the action before the understanding. Now that's not exactly the way that we think about it in America. In the modern world, we like to understand everything. Convince me, change my mind, and then I will do it. And that's not a bad rule of thumb, but there are some experiences that can only be understood through doing. And sometimes we do have to trust that the experience will be worth it, that the people who are encouraging us, the people who are teaching us, they know because they have lived it, and they lived it because someone in the past taught them, and it goes all the way back, all the way to the beginning, and that sometimes you just have to get on the roller coaster and see where it goes, that you can't have it explained before you have the ride. And Kashrut is very much something like that. So we're going to talk about some other reasons, but I just want to say from the beginning, by the end of tonight, you may not be 100% convinced. That's okay. Try it anyway. Well, do we keep kosher because it is good for us? Depends what you mean. Abarbanel, a famous Spanish commentator. God forbid that I should believe the reason for forbidden foods is medicinal. It's not because it's a healthy diet, right? This is not in the diet section of the bookstore. For were it so, the book of God's law would be in the same class as any of the minor brief medical books. Furthermore, our own eyes see that people who eat pork and insects and such are well and alive and healthy this very day. Right? If keeping kosher was the only way to make a body healthy, then everybody who didn't keep kosher would be sick. But we look around the world and people who don't keep kosher, they don't like drop dead because they're eating bad food. They live perfectly fine, healthy lives. Moreover, there are more dangerous animals and poisonous herbs which are not mentioned at all in the Torah. Right? If the Torah was just about keeping us safe, why didn't it say, stay away from lions? If the Torah is just about keeping us safe, why didn't it say, don't eat arsenic? Right? Don't eat mandrake or any of the other natural poisons in the world. All of which points to the conclusion that the law of God did not come to heal bodies and seek their material welfare, but to seek the health of the soul and cure its illnesses. Right? Kashrut is not a diet plan. Kashrut is about your spirit, your soul, your ruach, your nefesh. And that is something that you have to keep in mind as you begin to explore keeping kosher. Another reason, this time also from Rambam, this time from his Guide for the Perplexed, every commandment of the 613 commandments either imparts to us a true philosophy, eradicates a false philosophy, enforces a rule of social justice, or nullifies injustice, bestows a noble character trait, or warns against an evil character, evil traits. Right. Think about what he is saying here. He's saying that all the rules, all the mitzvot, all the commandments, they each have their own reason, they each have their own effect, they each have their own benefit, but all of them have to be doing at least one of these 6 things as well. They have to be changing us, either by saying, don't believe in this, for example, like idolatry, or do believe in this for understanding God's sacred unity that we talked about way back in the first class. Or they could be enforcing a rule of social justice, of giving tzedakah to those who are in need and helping them come up. Or they could be nullifying injustice by telling us that we have to take our efforts to stop people who would abuse the defenseless, or to stop those who would murder, or to stop those who would kidnap, that we have to stop those injustices. Or it bestows noble character trait. It makes you a kinder person, a more patient person, a person who is more forgiving. That the commandments will change us in those ways. Or it may warn against evil traits. Don't be jealous. Don't be angry. Don't be frustrated with other people so easily. The mitzvot all have these additional effects. It shapes who we are. And Kashrut very much shapes our character if we pay attention to what we're doing. Probably should have mentioned that at my start speech as well, but I will throw it in here. The laws of Kashrut can sometimes seem very mechanical. And once you get the hang of it, not very hard, meaning you don't put the wrong thing in your mouth and you're good. But that means that sometimes it's almost too easy to do, and you ignore why you are doing it. You ignore what these benefits are from each of the different rules of Kashrut. And so the rules need to be something that we feel, not only that we do. Okay, so why? Why is it that we do this wonderful thing? Well, according to Ramban, this is a different guy. This is Nachmanides, as he's often called in the Latin phrase. Well, it shapes your spirit. And he has a very interesting explanation of this. The blood is the nephesh, the life spirit of an animal, in which we find its natural instincts. Therefore, we are forbidden to mix animal blood with our blood, for we receive the Torah. We're not animals. Yes, we are animals in the biological sense, but we are not animals in the spiritual sense. For us, our lives have to remain untainted from the lower elements so that we can better comprehend higher concepts. We are commanded to be merciful, but if we were to eat blood, our souls would become closer to the animals, and it would create coarseness and cruelty. Unlike parts of the meat, the blood is not simply digested by the body, but remains as is, and thereby affects the very essence of a person. This is the meaning of the verse, for the nephesh, for the life spirit of the flesh is in the blood. And we'll talk about the rules on blood in a few minutes. So another reason is that you are what you eat, but not you are what you eat physically, but you are what you eat spiritually. How are we doing on all these different reasons so far? Okay. There is another reason. Giving you all the reasons first before I get to the rules. There's another reason. This one is from Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch. And Rabbi Hirsch was a great teacher in the 1800s. And he wrote many, many amazing books and insights into the keeping of Judaism in a free society, because he lived after the Enlightenment. He lived when Jews were getting more freedom, and he realized that he had to explain more. You couldn't just expect people to follow. And this is what he said. Just as the external temple, meaning the temple of Jerusalem, which represents our holy mission and to which you should sanctify yourself, becomes desecrated by impurity, so are these foods impure and unfit for your spirit. That is to say, these foods that God has told us not to eat, they are ritually impure for us, as far as they are, all of them, living a place of activity for your own being, which is summoned unto holiness. If you have eaten them, not only touched, but absorbed them into your system, you may be more nourished and better fed, but the animal instinct will be aroused more strongly within you, and your body becomes more blunted as an instrument of the Spirit. Your heart, instead of being holy, instead of only striving for holiness, namely your sublimity over everything animal-like, is drawn down to the animal, or becomes more apathetic and dull. Your spirit is now faced with a fiercer battle and is less equipped for the fight. Now, there are some who read both him and Rambam as talking almost metaphysically, that there's almost a certain essence of these things. There are others who go back more to the Rambam idea that if you are unthinking about how you eat, if you are not willing to say, I want it, but I'm not going to eat it because Torah told me not to, if you're not willing to have that discipline, that patience, that ability to control your appetites, then indeed, the more you give in to what you want, the more likely you are to continue to do worse in other aspects of your life. That is to say, as it's often put, if you cannot control whether or not you eat bacon because you just want it so much, do you really think you're going to be able to control yourself when there's a $20 bill that's just, at work, that's hanging out of someone's purse? Why not, right? The more you give in to taking what you want, when you want it, as you want it, with no ability to control that appetite and that will, the harder it will be for you to ever control those appetites and wills. Again, if you are actually thinking of Kashrut as part of the training of your spiritual self. Make sense? Okay. Another explanation. Again, we're back with Rambam, Guide for the Perplexed. Why don't we do this? Again, talking about the eating of the blood. And no, the blood was very unclean in the eyes of the Zava, a type of idolatry that was back in the ancient world. Yet they ate from the blood nevertheless, believing that it was the food of the spirits. Yet they ate from the blood nevertheless, food of the spirits. I doubled that for some reason. When one ate it, he was symbolically joining the spirits and would be able to tell the future. Judaism has been very, very careful not to mimic the activities of other idol worshippers and other ancient types of religions. And so perhaps, says Rambam, the reason God said specifically don't eat the blood was to keep us from doing like they were doing, using this as some kind of magic ritual. That may not be so important for us now, you may think, but who would ever do that? Well, there are religions to this day, very, very large one across the planet, that does still either metaphorically or believe in transubstantiation that they are drinking blood. If anybody has ever talked about how communion is believed to be done in many of the Christian faiths, they believe that the wine literally does become blood. So the idea that some religions would hold blood as a vehicle for spirituality should not be so surprising. Now, those are some of the reasons why. There are many, many more throughout Jewish history and thought, but here are some reasons that are not valid reasons, and yet people talk about them all the time. I hear people say, well, you know, the only reason the Torah told us not to eat pork was because they didn't know how to get rid of trichinosis. Now, trichinosis is a type of worm that's inside the meat of pigs, and the idea is it wasn't that God didn't want us to eat pigs, it was dangerous to eat pigs. The same thing they will say about shellfish. You know, oh, sure, if you eat oysters at the wrong time of year, you could get really sick. So they just said, don't eat oysters. That is not what the Torah is saying, because the Torah does not tell us about things like bacteria. The Torah does not tell us about how to avoid some other diseases from being just around cows and sheep and other animals. The Torah is not talking about diseases. The Torah is talking about spirituality. Some people will say, well, it's just superstition, right? If people thought it was good luck or bad luck, and that was just what they did, they didn't really understand, or it's just following tradition. Neither of those are adequate reasons to explain both why I personally keep kosher, or why people have kept kosher for thousands of years, despite the inconvenience. It's not exactly hard, but it can be inconvenient. It certainly can be more expensive nowadays. Instead, we have to look for the deeper reasons that we have already covered. All right. So how does it actually work? Well, here are the basics, right? Kosher 101. 1, eat only beasts, eat only animals with cloven hooves that chew their cud after they have been properly slaughtered, had their blood drained, and certain fats in the sciatic nerve removed. Boom. You want a cow? No problem. Cows have a cloven hoof. That means their foot is divided into 2 separate pieces, and cows chew their cuds. They are ruminants. They eat, in the grass, and then if you've ever seen a cow, they'll also be sitting there just like, that's because the grass goes in, and then it comes back into their mouth. They chew it some more. It goes down. They chew it some more. That's how the cows digest. Animals like that, no problem. Other examples are sheep and goats. No problem. They are kosher. Other examples that are a little more exotic, deer, giraffes. Those are also kosher animals, but don't expect to find giraffe meat at the supermarket. It has to be properly slaughtered. The blood has to be removed, and certain fats in the sciatic nerve are also removed. Once you've done that, enjoy your cow. No problem, eat your cow. Part 2, any bird not on the Torah's short list of forbidden ones is fine after properly slaughtered in preparation. So there was a list in the Torah, which we will look at, that has a list of birds that we don't eat. Anything not on the list would technically be fine. no problem. That means that, in fact, most birds are kosher birds. And as long as they are slaughtered, as long as you kill them correctly, no problem. So all of the birds that you're likely to see in the supermarket could be kosher. Chicken, turkey, what else do you get in the supermarket now?
Pigeon.
What? Pigeon or doves, yes, pigeon or doves. Duck, duck can also be kosher. Goose can be kosher. Swan, actually not swan, but I don't think anyone eats swan anymore, do they? I think only in England they eat swans. Anyway, swan is not kosher. 3, let's go to the ocean. If it comes from the ocean, fish with fins and scales and some types of locusts, the little grasshopper bugs, those are kosher and you can eat them. Right? So if you want to have lobster, I'm sorry, no lobster. Clams, shrimp, oysters, mollusks, scallops, octopus, squid, off the menu. It's got to be like a cartoon fish, you know. It's got to have a fin, and it's got to have scales, you know, and real scales that if you rub your hand on them, they can come off. So shark, not kosher. Whales, not kosher. Door opener, maybe. Thank you. They can't see us, but we can see them. Got it. So those are not kosher, but all of your basic fish, things like bass, salmon, carp, I'm trying to think of other basic fish that you might come across. Those are all fine. Almost all, everything that you basically think of as being a fish is going to be okay. The only things that get a little tricky are things like eels. Eels are not okay. But basic fish, we're good. Everyone understanding so far? All right. Plants and minerals are all accepted. You want to have lettuce, you want to have a radish, you want to have some passion fruit, no problem. You want to have basil, you want to have salt, you want to have pepper, no problem. These are all things that are just fine. Meat and milk, while they are fine on their own, we do not mix them together. So if you can remember those 5 things, you've got the basics of keeping kosher. You all with me so far? It's not such a huge list, is it? No, but keeping them actually will change a big, excuse me. Yara, would you mind telling Natan that I'm in a class, which he knows about since he's the adult education chair? Let me just turn off my ringer. You can text him, that's fine. It's the only time I allow texting during my classes. So yes, these 5 things are not that hard, but if you keep them, it does change the whole shape of the way you live your life. But it's important to remember that these are a bundle of different mitzvot. That is to say, you probably heard someone say, I keep kosher, or I don't keep kosher, or I'm shomer kashrut, I keep kosher. The truth is, there isn't just one mitzvah. There are a whole bunch of different mitzvot, and almost everybody keeps some of them already. The question is being able to keep more of them more consistently. So for example, kosher species, plants, bugs, fish, bird, animals, there are different ones of each category that are kosher and not kosher. But by and large, most people in the US nowadays, in the 21st century, most people generally have a diet that is mostly of kosher things. Yes, pork is a big question and problem for many people, and shellfish and things from the ocean, depending upon where you live and what you like to eat, that can be a bit of an issue. But cows and chicken are the 2 main meats that most people eat. They are very fine in and of themselves. However, kosher killing, this is where it gets a little bit harder. All right, plant, bug, and fish, you don't have to worry about it. There's no special way to kill them. However, for birds and animals, yes, this is where it gets a little trickier, because without a kosher butcher, it's very hard to get them. Now, there are ways to get kosher meat in Orlando. We don't have a kosher supermarket, but you can go to the Winn-Dixie in Fern Park and a few other places around, and they do have a kosher meat section. And don't be too surprised when you see the prices. It's just our way of trying to tell you don't eat too much meat. Kosher preparation, or sorry, kosher killing, I meant to also point out, there are many people who keep part of the rules of kosher killing that don't realize it. When was the last time you were driving down the road and you saw a dead animal on the side of the road and you thought, dinner? No? Okay. When I was up in Baltimore and there were many more deer everywhere and many deer running across the roads and many deer getting hurt by cars, there were people who, if they found a dead deer, they would collect the deer, right? I mean, hunters eat deer all the time, don't they? So why would I bypass free meat that's just sitting there? But in Judaism, we say no. Now, the fact that all of you are looking at me like, who would eat just a dead animal they found on the side of the road, even a tasty one like a deer? I mean, we're not talking about armadillos here. Why would you eat that? Well, that's because you've already got the kosher sensibility. You already feel that just eating an animal that's like funk on the road doesn't feel right. So you're already there. You're already there. Kosher preparation, the blat, the fat, the gid and nashe, we're going to talk about those next time. We're not going to go into those too much today. We'll talk about the blood a little bit. And kosher cooking, the separation of meat and milk, also we're going to talk about more in our next segment. There's just too much to put into one class. So let's go and take a look at these bundles. Kosher species. So the way that Judaism divides up what you can eat is a very food pyramid kind of style. That is to say, the more complicated or advanced the life form, the harder it is to make it kosher. So we'll start at the very bottom of the world organic system, plants and minerals, right? Salt. Nothing you have to do to make salt kosher. Dig it out of the ground, collect it from seawater, boom, it's fine. Plants. You want to eat an apple? Pick an apple. You're fine. There's nothing you have to do to make the apple kosher. Watch out for worms, they're not kosher, but basic apple, no problem. Right? These most common things and lowest, as we would consider them to be a sentient life, is absolutely easy to turn into dinner. Moving up the scale, things that are a little bit more, they got some motion going to them, like fish or like the certain types of locusts and grasshoppers we can eat. Well, those, yes, we do have to be careful we pick the right kind, right? So we don't get to eat all of them, but we do get to eat most of them. And in preparation, it's easy. You pick a fish out of the water and you can eat it. I don't recommend that, but technically you could eat a fish just, if you've ever seen people try to eat goldfish live, technically that is kosher. Do not recommend it, but technically it is kosher. Moving further up into the world of birds, where we can see that there's a little bit more connection between us and them, a little bit more awareness of their world, a little bit more of a powerful life energy in them, we narrow our list even more. So we don't eat all the birds. There are lots of birds we don't eat. And when we kill them, we have to do it in a very particular way. We take much more care and attention to the slaughter and preparation of birds than we would for fish. And then when we move up to animals, we are into a very narrow category indeed. Most animals in the world, land animals, are not kosher. And that means that we have a very limited number, and in fact, almost all of them tend to be domesticated or domesticatable animals. That are animals that we can raise in a way that means that we are taking care of them before they take care of us. And when we prepare them, when we slaughter them, we have to be extremely careful that we are doing it in the correct way, which we will talk about in more detail. And then, of course, we reach humanity, which we don't eat. Right? No cannibalism. You're not allowed to eat human beings. Just don't. I know. Human is off the menu. Okay, so let's talk about the species a little bit more. Plants. Genesis. See, says God, I give you every seed-bearing plant that is upon all the earth and every tree that has seed-bearing fruit. They shall be yours for food. Boom. Universal approval of everything that grows from the ground. All plants are by themselves kosher. If other ingredients are added beyond salt, more investigation is needed. We'll talk a little bit more about how complicated food manufacture has got in the 20th and 21st century. But basically speaking, if you just got a head of lettuce, you're usually going to be fine. We're good? Okay. Bugs. You shall not eat among all the things that swarm upon the earth, anything that crawls on its belly, or anything that walks on fours, or anything that has many legs, for they are an abomination. An abomination does not mean there's something wrong with them. It means that in relationship to you and food, there is something that is a barrier between you. That's the Jewish concept of toiva, of an abomination, doesn't mean that they are wrong by themselves. We don't have a rule that we have to go out and kill all snakes. We don't have a rule of kill all centipedes. We just have the rule, don't eat snakes, don't eat centipedes. But, however, says the book of Leviticus, these you may eat among all the winged swarming things that walk on the fours, all that have above their feet jointed legs to leap with on the ground. Of these you may eat the following: locusts of every variety, all varieties of bulb locusts, crickets of every variety, and all varieties of grasshopper. Now, the Torah makes it a little bit clearer of exactly which species these are, but it's not 100% clear to most of us, because as Jews moved out of the Middle East, by and large, and as Jews stopped eating locusts and grasshoppers, we also stopped teaching the next generation which ones were okay. So if you lived in Europe, for example, 500 years ago, you would not necessarily know which grasshopper was kosher, and you would not be eating them, just to be careful. Nowadays, there are still some communities that did preserve those traditions, and which still do, most famously the Yemenite Jewish community. And there are some experts who have refined their ability to tell the kosher from non-kosher bugs. I am not one of those experts. I do not eat bugs. I'm sorry. And if you want to eat bugs, I can put you in touch with people who can tell you, but it's not going to be me. Sorry. Fish. Leviticus 11. These you may eat, all that live in the water, anything in water, whether it is the seas or in streams that has fins and scales. These you may eat. But anything in the seas or in the streams that has no fins or scales, among all the swarming things of the water and among all the living creatures that are in the water, they are an abomination to you. So, a lobster does not have fins and scales, not kosher. Bass has fins and scales, it's kosher. It's just really that simple. And it's quite easy to categorize one type of fish into another. We're good? We're good. Things in the air, what we would call birds. The following shall you abominate. That means treat as things you will not eat among the birds. They shall not be eaten. They are an abomination. The eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the kite, falcons of every variety, all varieties of raven, the ostrich, the nighthawk, the seagull, hawks of every variety, the little owl, the cormorant, the great owl, the white owl, the pelican, the bustard, the stork, herons of every variety, the hoopie. Yeah, I'm always really unsure about that one, even in the English, and the bat. Now, the translation for many of these birds is still debated among scholars, and was debated and has been debated for a very long time. So since we debate some of these, we have accepted that we eat birds that we know are okay. Now, the good thing is, all the birds you want to eat, we know are okay. If you suddenly decide you want to eat some strange bird that comes from the Amazonian rainforest, then we'll have to investigate a little more carefully to find out if it's one of these varieties or not. But generally speaking, the birds that you're used to thinking about eating are birds that are fine. We're good? So, when we get to the land animals, like I said, we're going to get our shortest list. These are the creatures that you may eat from among all the land animals. Any animal that has true hooves, split in two pieces, with clefts through the hoofs, and that chews the cud, such you may eat. Cow, sheep, deer, giraffe, yes, all of those are kosher. Pigs, rabbits, camels, cats, horses, squirrels, dogs, guinea pigs, these are all animals that are eaten in many countries. They are not kosher. Sorry to disappoint. I know usually in this country, the only one that makes people upset is not having the pork. But in different countries, all the other animals are on the menu too. And they're not on the menu in the kosher restaurant. Any questions on this list?
I will put the giraffe there too.
Well, you can choose not to eat a giraffe, but the giraffe is a kosher animal, right? So that's the difference. Is you can choose to eat whatever you want to eat from among the kosher options. That's why if somebody chooses to be a vegetarian, provided that they are doing it in a healthy way, that's perfectly fine, right? You're allowed to not eat all animals if you want, but if you want to eat, it does have to be from the kosher category. We're good? Okay. Slaughter. As I mentioned, this is the next requirement. We've picked the right animal, assuming we're talking about an animal and not a bush. Now I need to slaughter. You laugh at that, about the idea of the slaughtering of a bush. My mother, who was an education director in a synagogue for many, many years, would often have tour groups come from the local Catholic private school. And one of the children, when they were visiting, when she said, "Do you have any questions?" After she had explained about keeping kosher, he said, "How do you kill a pickle?" Because he only knew kosher pickles. So he wanted to know, how do you kill a pickle to make it a kosher pickle? Obviously, that she explained it very delicately, that it wasn't about how we killed the pickle. It was just a style that was common among kosher cooking that became the name of that flavor of pickle. But other animals, it's a little trickier, right? You shall be holy people to me. You must not eat flesh torn by beasts in the field. You shall cast it to the dogs. This is roadkill. An animal that has been attacked, that has been killed, that has been somehow died of causes other than a proper slaughter, we don't get to eat. Right? We can feed it to our dogs, but we can't eat it ourselves. You shall not eat anything that has died a natural death. Give it to the stranger in your community to eat, or you may sell it to a foreigner. You have a cow, the cow gets sick, the cow dies, you're not allowed to eat it. All right? If a cow just dies by itself, it is not available for kosher consumption. And then we get to the more detailed part of slaughter. If the place where the Lord has chosen to establish his name is too far from you, meaning the altar that would eventually be in Jerusalem, you may slaughter any of the cattle or sheep that the Lord gives you, as I have instructed you, and you may eat to your heart's content in your settlements. This is giving us permission to slaughter an animal, even not at the altar of the temple. But there's a problem here. Nowhere in the Torah do we get detailed instructions of how to do the slaughter. God says he's instructed us, but we don't see those instructions. This is what we call one of the indications for the oral Torah, for the Torah Sheba'al Peh. The idea that God couldn't just say it, God had to show it. God had to give Moses the understanding so that he would be able to do it. And indeed, you still today cannot learn to be a kosher butcher by reading a book. Right? You can only learn to be a kosher butcher by studying with another butcher who will show you exactly what to do and how to do it, and then you will practice over and over again on a real animal with that instruction. So that still remains to this day something that can only be learned with firsthand teacher-to-student sharing of knowledge. So what was shared? What do we do? Well, there are 5 basic requirements for a shochet, for the slaughterer, to make sure that what he does during shechita, during slaughter, that it is correct. So the 5 basic elements are: there should be no interruption in the incision. Right? When the knife is being pulled across the throat of the animal, you can't go halfway and then again. It has to be one motion that severs all the way across in one blow. And I apologize for anybody that's squeamish. 2, there should be no pressing of the chalaf, of the special knife that's used, against the neck. This would exclude the use of an axe, hatchet, or guillotine. You can't just push the blade through. The blade has to be pulled through, right? That makes a much cleaner, smoother cut for the animal. 3, the chalaf should not be covered by the hide of the cattle, the wool of sheep, or feathers of the bird, and therefore the chalaf has to be of adequate length. You can't just have like a little tiny thin blade and just keep pushing it through all the different bits to saw your way down. It has to be big enough that it can come all the way through without being covered and blocked by any of the other tissues of the animal. 4, the incision must be at the appropriate site to sever the major structures and vessels at the neck. The jugular vein, the carotid artery, the trachea, the windpipe, all of these are gone with that one slice. right? Now, that has a very functional purpose, which means that when you do the slice, all of the blood going to the head is stopped, and all of the blood in the head is released. So now the brain has no blood. And the brain without blood, the animal passes out instantly. So this is a way to ensure that this is not a painful experience for the animal, that instead the animal is essentially knocked unconscious perfectly with that slice, simply by preventing any blood from coming in and making sure all the blood that's there can go. Anybody here who's ever, stood up quickly and you get a little lightheaded, right? That's that same process. The blood is not going to your brain correctly for a couple seconds. Well, you can imagine that if this was all open, it would be a permanent situation. And then finally, number 5, there must be no tearing of the vessels before or during the shechita process, that you don't nick the animal. It can't be like a little bit here, a little bit there. It has to be all one smooth. This is one reason why the knives are always checked and tested to make sure they are perfectly sharp. The sharpest knives you will ever find are the knives that are used for shechita, for kosher slaughter. How are we doing? Okay, if you're not planning to be a butcher, that's okay, but you should know this is how the animals are taken care of. This is part of, as I said, absorbing not only the mechanics of the rule, but the meaning of the rule, which is that we are aware of how the animals were treated before they became our food. Blood. You must not consume any blood, either of bird or of animal, in any of your settlements. Anyone who eats blood shall be cut off from his kin. This is in Leviticus, it's also in Genesis, it's also in Leviticus 17, it's also in Deuteronomy 12. It's kind of like God meant this. All right, so anybody here who really, really likes blood sausage, I'm sorry, not kosher. All large vessels are removed after the blood has been drained, which means that if they kill the animal, they will take out all of the big, arteries and veins that are in the animal when they're preparing the meat. And the meat is then salted and soaked to remove the rest. And this is a process that takes like a few days to draw out all of the blood. You put the salt on the meat, and the salt pulls the blood to the surface, and then you wash that salt off, and then you put new salt on, and it pulls more blood. And you do this over and over until the process is done. Or, if you don't have time and you want to eat it today, you broil the meat. If you've ever done broiling, you'll know that as you broil it, the juices in the meat, the blood, will bubble up to the top, and then you can remove that from the surface of the meat. That's how the blood is pumped out by the heat of the broiling process. That's one of the ways the only way rather, that chopped liver can be done, because liver is so full of blood, the only way to get it all out is through broiling. Meat and milk, as I mentioned. This is a complicated piece, and we'll go into more details about it, but I just want to remind you of the basic principle. You shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. Remember, kid in English means baby goat, right? Kid in English can mean baby goat. We're not talking about like child kid. This is small little goat. This is stated in Deuteronomy 14 and Exodus 23 and Exodus 34. It's mentioned 3 times in the Torah. The word kid, says Shulchan Aruch, the great law code, is not specific, meaning we're not only talking about baby goats. It is the same rule with ox, sheep, and goat. There is no difference if it is the milk of the mother or of another animal. Rather, the verse refers to the common case. So why did it say don't boil the kid in the mother's milk? Because that was what lots of people did. That was the most common, that was like a common dish that people would serve. And by using that example, the Torah was trying to tell us, don't do it with any milk, with any meat. It's a universal that's given as a specific. Still with me on the logic there? Okay. Where you may not be with me at first is the idea, according to the rabbis, that we do not eat poultry. We do not eat bird meat with milk. It is forbidden to partake of poultry and milk according to rabbinic law, so that people at large will not be negligent and come to violate the scriptural prohibition, which is of animal meat and milk. All right, so yes, chicken and milk cannot be in the same dish, right? So chicken pizza doesn't happen. Now, you're probably going, wait a minute. I can understand cow and baby cow, because, Milk of the mother, meat of the child. Do chickens have milk? Right? Do chickens nurse their young? No, of course they do not. And so the question then becomes, why was this there? Well, because of the idea that a person would make a mistake. A person would be confused between what was beef and what was not beef. Now, for most of you, you're probably thinking of, well, let me ask you, which one is from a cow?
Right.
Which one's from a chicken? Not hard, is it? Right? And yes, nowadays we have meat that comes from a cow that looks like that, and we have meat that comes from a chicken that looks like that. This is not how meat looked 2,000 years ago. Which one comes from a bird? Which one comes from a land animal? And are you sure? I'm sure you could all guess because you got a 50-50 chance. But would anybody here like to actually put $100 on which one it is? No.
You actually get $100 to get it right.
No, I'm not going to give you a 50-50 chance of getting $100 because I don't know how desperate you are, and you might have a gambling addiction, but the point, and you probably know that I wouldn't make you pay me $100 if you got it wrong, so you'd be taking advantage of me. So the issue here, by the way, one of these is lamb, and the other is duck. Which one is which? The one on the right is the duck. The one on the left is the lamb. Would you have gotten that right? It's a good thing I didn't take your bet. What about now? Can you tell which one's which?
Chicken.
Chicken on the
left.
Chicken on the left?
No,
No,
that's not
no,
chicken.
that's beef.
That's beef. That one is beef. Beef or
The
lamb.
left is chicken, right's beef.
Yeah.
The left, no.
Left is beef.
No.
The left is lamb or goat, I believe, and the right was game hen. Was wild like pheasant.
I've never heard of grinding bird before.
Well, that's because we're all rich. And I don't mean to say that everybody here in this room is rich, Bloomberg rich. I mean, compared to people in the past, we've all got easy access to meat. At the very least, you can eat a Hebrew National Kosher hot dog. But in the past, if you had a couple little birds that you just happened to catch in your net, you were going to want to make their meat go further and share it with your whole family, not just have one chicken sandwich for yourself. And so you grind up meat to stretch the meat so that you can give it to more people. So that's why ground meat happens in the first place. It's not just so we can have hamburgers, it's so that we can share the meat with more people or more meals.
Yeah, with the ground meat, you add skim,
Exactly.
add fat.
And you can also add a bit of flour or a bit of corn or a bit of sawdust. You can add a little bit of extra filler to make it go further.
Make it more profitable.
Okay, so that leads me to our final point for tonight, which is how do you know what is kosher when you didn't kill it and you didn't bake it and you didn't put it in the box that's sitting on the supermarket shelf? Well, this is a problem that's a new problem. 500, 600, 700 years ago, this wasn't a problem because if you wanted meat, you went to the butcher and the butcher had cows in the back and the butcher killed the cow and then he gave you some meat. Usually it wasn't the same day like that, but you worked it out with the butcher and that's how you get your meat. And the butcher would sit next to you in the synagogue. So you knew who he was, you knew if you could trust him and you could see how he did his work and you were fine. You knew the person who made your food. You went to the baker, you knew the baker. You went to the guy who was cooking the special dish for at his house, you knew what he was cooking because everybody knew everybody, no problem. Nowadays, most food production is a little different. We don't know the ingredients or the processes used to make packaged food. Right? How many of you always check the ingredients before you buy something? Exactly. Right? Most of us don't really have that habit. You might check the calories, right, if you're on a diet or something, but you're probably not checking the ingredients. How do you know they didn't use bugs? Because I'll tell you, there are many things in American supermarkets that use bugs. In particular, there's a particular type of beetle that they grind up and use for the dye, for the color red, right? You didn't know that. Why? Because you didn't check. And even if you checked, it would say red dye. It wouldn't actually say beetle dye. because, you know, they know if it says beetle on the package, people won't buy it. So there are things that are made, and there are also many things within the American administration that, you know, if there happen to be a couple pieces of rat that fall into your hot dogs, as long as it's below a certain percentage, it's okay. They're not going to make you change your whole thing, right? The American law, which is fair as far as health goes, does allow for a certain foreign contaminant percentage to be possible. We don't, right? That's not really what we do. And we don't know the people who are involved, right? If my neighbor bakes me a cupcake and I live in my Jewish community and we've been together for all the time, I can trust him, he can trust me. Of course, I'll eat the cupcake that my Jewish neighbor gave me if I lived 500 years ago. But if I'm sitting and someone says, oh, by the way, I want to give you a cupcake, and it's some random person who I don't know, and I don't know if they keep kosher, I don't know if they even understand that I keep kosher, do I know what's in the cupcake? Maybe it was made with lard. You might all know lard. It's not popular anymore. It used to be very popular. Lard is pig fat and used as a shortening for many, many recipes. And speaking from my youth, very tasty. All right? So how do I know if it's kosher or not? Well, what we've developed over the last couple hundred years is a system of supervision to assure the consumer that the food that they don't know is in fact kosher. That is to say, organizations and individuals whom we trust put their stamp of approval on food, and then we know that it's kosher. This is a short list of kosher symbols. Right? There are hundreds of different organizations around the world. These are some of the most common ones that you'll come across. Among the most common ones are the OU, the circle U, the triangle K, and Kaf K is also very, very common. The triangle CRC is also pretty common. Triangle K is also kosher, but there's a bit of a political turf battle between them and some Orthodox groups. So many Orthodox people do not use triangle K, but I can tell you it is a political debate. It is not about halakha, it's not about law. And that's unfortunately what happens when business and religion get too entangled. It can cause unnecessary fighting. So if you see a food product with one of these stamps on it, you know somebody else has checked it and made sure that the ingredients were good and that the process was reliable, and that you can trust that the person who made it didn't change it between when they checked it and when it came to you. And that means that you know you're eating something kosher. Now, thankfully, we happen to be living in a kosher golden age. And if you walk into a supermarket, you will find that anywhere from 60 to 80% of the products that are on the shelves have one of these. And if the product doesn't, chances are the one next to it does. So if one ketchup doesn't have the symbol, I can guarantee you the ketchup sitting next to it will. I'm not going to name names because, you know, I'm not here to promote a particular product, but you will find that just about everything that you would possibly want, apart from bacon, is going to turn out to have a kosher variety available. And even bacon, there's something called beef fry, which is a particular cut of the cow that comes really, really close to the taste and style of bacon. But the idea of having substitutes is perfectly fine, and we can talk about those in more details if your heart is set on something.
What is the triangle K?
That's not on the list. Not on that. Well, because this graphic was made by an Orthodox group, and that Orthodox group has a beef with triangle K. Sorry. Yes, I'll be here all night. Try the veal. Actually, don't try the veal. There's some discussions about whether or not veal is kosher because of how the animals are often treated before the slaughter. But it's an old comedy line. Any other questions before we wrap up and move on to class number 2, if you are staying for that one? Okay, great. Have a great night, everyone.